Welcome to Mrs. Feighery's video number 4 for Chapter 35, America in World War II. Republicans nominated Thomas E. Dewey, a young liberal governor of New York, and paired him with isolationist John Bricker of Ohio for the election of 1944. FDR was the Democratic lock, but because of his age, the vice presidential candidate was carefully chosen to be Harry S. Truman, who won out over Henry A. Wallace, an ill-balanced and unpredictable liberal. Dewey went on a rampaging campaign offensive, while FDR, who was stuck with World War II problems, could not go out very much. The new Political Action Committee of the CIO contributed considerable money. It was organized to get around the law banning direct use of Union funds for political purposes. In the end, Roosevelt stomped Dewey, 432 electoral votes to 99, and the fourth-term issue wasn't even that big of a deal, since the precedent had already been broken 3 years before. FDR won because the war was going well and because people wanted to stick with him. With the Allies making the round-the-clock bombings against German cities and industries and transportation arteries, Hitler staked everything on one last blow. December 16, 1944, Hitler pushed everything he had against the thinly held American line in the Ardennes Forest. His objective was to take the port of Antwerp, which would give him access to fuel for his armored divisions, while cutting the Allies off from their key supply operation. On the retreat and losing, Hitler concentrated his forces and threw them in the Ardennes Forest on December 16, 1944, starting what was called the Battle of the Bulge. Caught off guard, the Americans were driven back, creating a bulge in the line, hence the name Battle of the Bulge. Their advance was checked only by hastily transporting airborne units by truck to the line. The 101st Airborne, commanded by General A.C. McCulloch, became surrounded by the enemy. After a month of fierce fighting and bombardment, the German commander demanded McCulloch to surrender or be annihilated. The American general responded with one word: nuts. Not long after, General Patton was able to break through the German lines and relieve the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. Hitler nearly succeeded in his gamble, but the 10-day penetration was finally stopped by the 101st Airborne Division that stood firm at the vital bastion of Bastogne, which was commanded by General McCulloch. In March of 1945, the Americans reached the Rhine River of Germany and then pushed toward the River Elbe. From there, joining Soviet troops, they marched towards Berlin. As the Americans pushed the enemy back across the Elbe River into Germany, they were horrified to find concentration camps stinking of death in attempted genocide. The Nazis engaged in the extermination of Jews and undesirables that totaled around 11 million in total. As the Soviets moved into Berlin in April 1945, the desperate house-to-house fighting for the city began and turned into merciless pillaging and rape. Adolf Hitler, knowing that he had lost, committed suicide in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. Meanwhile, in America, FDR had died from a massive cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945. May 7, 1945, what was left of the German government surrendered unconditionally. So May 7th was the date of the unofficial German surrender, and the next day, May 8th, was officially proclaimed VE Day, which means Victory in Europe Day. American submarines began destroying Japanese merchant ships as fast as they set sail at that point, destroying about 50% of Japan's entire merchant fleet. March 9th to 10th, 1945, Massive firebomb raids on Tokyo annihilated the city, destroying over 250,000 buildings and taking an estimated 83,000 people with it. You can see the picture of the aftermath of Tokyo's bombing the morning after. General MacArthur completed his conquest of New Guinea and headed back to the Philippines. He brought 600 ships and 250,000 men to the island, and when he stepped on the shore, he said, "People of the Philippines, I have returned. Rally to me." Japan's navy made one last effort to destroy MacArthur's fleet at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. It was actually 3 separate battles, but MacArthur won all 3, and Japan's navy was no more. The Japanese held up holes as the Allies attempted to take back the Philippines, causing over 60,000 American casualties. The Philippines were not conquered until July. As the Americans began to squeeze Japan, they needed to take the tiny island of Iwo Jima. It was needed as an airfield for returning bombers that were hitting Japan. In March of 1945, Iwo Jima was captured, and this 25-day assault left over 4,000 Americans dead. Okinawa, which was a well-defended Japanese island, was next. Fighting dragged on from April to June, costing over 50,000 American casualties. During the assault on Okinawa, the U.S. Navy took severe damage from Japanese suicide pilots that were known as kamikazes. Okinawa was won after fighting from April to June of 1945 and was captured at the cost of 50,000 American lives. The picture that you see here is a very famous picture of the flag raising at Iwo Jima. Atop Mount Suribachi, press photographer Joe Rosenthal took this picture, which is probably the most famous picture of the war. At the Potsdam Conference, which was held in Berlin in July 1945, President Truman met with Joseph Stalin and the British leaders, which did not include Churchill. The Allies issued an ultimatum: surrender or be destroyed. The Manhattan Project was the name of the project that was to create the atomic bomb. Congress put $2 million towards the project. July 16, 1945, experts detonated the first atomic device near Alamogordo, New Mexico. When Japan refused to surrender, the Potsdam threat was fulfilled. When they refused to surrender, Americans dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and actually just one atomic bomb. 70,000 people died instantly, and some 180,000 people were left killed, wounded, or missing. 60,000 more died soon after from burns and radiation disease. The picture that you see here is of Hiroshima, Japan, in August 1945. The almost incomprehensibly destructive power of the first atomic bomb is evident in this photograph. This single bomb killed an estimated 130,000 Japanese, many of whom succumbed months after the blast to agonizing deaths from exposure to radiation. 2 days later, on August 8th, Stalin entered the war against Japan on the last day of the deadline given by the Allies. August 9th, they dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. The result was 80,000 people killed or missing. On August 8, 1945, the Soviets declared war on Japan just as promised, and 2 days later, on August 10th, Japan sued for peace on one condition: that the Emperor Hirohito be allowed to remain on the Japanese throne. Despite the unconditional surrender clause, the Allies accepted. The formal end came on September 2, 1945, on the battleship the USS Missouri, where Hirohito surrendered to General MacArthur. This is the picture of the Japanese surrender. Representatives of the Japanese government arrived to sign the surrender document on the deck of the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Harbor, September 2nd, 1945. General MacArthur made a conciliatory address, expressing hope that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge, a world founded on faith and understanding. A Japanese diplomat attended wondered whether it would have been possible for us, had we been victorious, to embrace the vanquished with a similar magnanimity. Soon thereafter, General MacArthur took up his duties as director of the U.S. occupation of Japan. America suffered 1 million casualties, but the number killed by disease and infections was very low thanks to using blood plasma and new miracle drugs like penicillin. The losses during World War II were astronomical, but the U.S. suffered little losses. There were only 2 Japanese attacks on the home soil in California and Oregon that were rather harmless. The success was partly thanks to the excellent United States generals and admirals and their leaders. Industry also rose to the challenge, putting out a phenomenal amount of goods, proving wrong Hermann Göring, a Nazi leader who had scorned America's lack of manufacturing skills. This is a table that shows the comparative costs of World War II by country, by military deaths, civilian deaths, how much was spent by the government, and the damage to civilian property. We'll look at this chart in class, but you can see that in comparison to the other countries, the United States had a relatively low impact in both military deaths, civilian deaths, and in damage to civilian property. This is the works cited page. All the images in this presentation are taken from the public domain.